There is a delight in the hardy life of the open. There are no words that can tell the hidden spirit of the wilderness, that can reveal its mystery, its melancholy, and its charm. The nation behaves well if it treats the natural resources as assets which it must turn over to the next generation, increased and not impaired in value. Teddy Roosevelt, Kansas, August 31st, 1910.
Hello and welcome to Trail Mix by Gaze at the National Parks, the podcast. Trail Mix is the short form episode of our podcast. Our long form episode brings you one hiking trail in one national park, one park at a time. Trail Mix allows us to dive a little deeper into some other things. Like today, when it comes to Teddy Roosevelt. So, Mike, we talked a little bit about, we were like, we should really do a trail mix just about Teddy Roosevelt.
Right.
Because he was so instrumental in so many things.
That's right. Teddy Roosevelt was, a hero of the Spanish-American War. He is known for his Rough Riders, which were basically cavalry during the time of the Spanish-American War. He was obviously a president for 2 terms in office. And one of the big things that Roosevelt had a major hand in was not only the creation of the United States Forestry Service, but the creation of the National Park System as we see it today.
That's right. So let's dig in. A few years ago, I was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York.
Yep.
And they have different exhibits that are there all the time, and they have some that are rotating. And there was a rotating exhibit just specifically on nature. There was this oil on wood by Rousseau, who is a French painter.
Henri Rousseau?
Theodore Rousseau.
Oh.
Speaking of Teddy Roosevelt, different Theodore. He was alive 1812 to 1867. And the piece that I was looking at was called The Edge of the Woods at Mont-Gérard Fontainebleau Forest.
Okay. That's a mouthful.
It is. And he, I guess, apparently painted this between 1852 and 1854. This piece is a part of the Catherine Lorillard Wolf collection, and it is brought to us by the Wolf Fund. There's this tiny little placard next to the painting. And as you know, when I go into museums, I read everything.
Yes.
So I read this placard, and it made my ears perk up because this is what the placard said.
Or your eyes perk up.
Right.
Yeah.
No artist was more passionately dedicated to Fontainebleau than Rousseau. For 4 decades, he brought his observant gaze and his intense study of Dutch old masters to bear on the forest's varied terrain while assuming the role of protector and guardian. At mid-century, he initiated a petition to safeguard the old trees from commercial interests that would deprive artists of, quote, their inspiration, their joys, and their futures, end quote, and to all visitors of these, quote, venerable souvenirs of past ages, end quote. Rousseau's actions resulted in an 1861 imperial decree that set aside 4,000 acres of the forest as a partie artistique, the first nature preserve in history. And then it says in parentheses, soon after the United States followed suit with the Yosemite land grant and the establishment of Yellowstone as the first national park. So I found this to be very interesting because over in France, this idea of government preserving land was for the sake of artists, giving artists subjects to paint.
Right, and space to do it in.
People to, enjoy them.
Right.
And it wasn't long after that we started doing that over here in the United States.
Yeah.
And Teddy Roosevelt was a large part of that. As I started researching this, I found some more info about this in a book called Natural Interests, written by Caroline Ford. Rousseau submitted his petition to him. I'm guessing this is Napoleon III. Rousseau submitted his petition to Napoleon III and was given a dinner invitation in response. He articulated his argument for the preservation of Fontainebleau in patriotic language and in terms of the innate rights of the natural world. A year later, a report was prepared on the future management of the forest, and the report's plan then instituted by imperial decree 8 years later in 1861. It provided the protection of 12 areas of the forest, which would not be managed by the forest administration, and which would be at the disposition of the artists. 8 of these areas had been mentioned by Rousseau. In all, about 6.5% of the entire forest was set aside as a réserve artistique. The emperor's decree on the 13th of August, 1861, divided the forest into 3 sections. And the one section that was reserved for artists actually was increased when he set all of this aside. So yes, I found that to be really helpful to know sort of where the idea of the government reserving land really sort of originated.
And conservancy, basically, that's probably the first baby steps towards it.
Outside of native people's conservancy of certain areas.
Right.
And
or just
respect for that land.
Working as caretakers of the land.
Working as caretakers for the land. Exactly.
Because the earth giveth and the earth taketh away.
Doesn't she?
Here we are in this wild century we're living in.
Right.
Taketh away it does.
Right.
And rightfully so.
Teddy Roosevelt was obviously one of the leading voices in America for conservancy.
Right.
Along
with his friend John Muir.
Yes.
Which we should probably do a whole episode about as well.
We will.
Forthcoming.
We will.
Yeah.
So Teddy Roosevelt is often considered the conservationist president. He established, when he was president, he helped establish 150 national forests, 51 federal bird reserves, 4 national game preserves, 5 national parks, 18 national monuments, and in total over 230 million acres of public land.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt had always had a love of nature. It was kind of a deep-seated love, but it was sort of transformative throughout his life. So he was not a very well child. He was often very sick, and he actually took up I don't want to say habit, the
hobby.
Thank you. He took up the hobby of taxidermy. Saying it's a habit makes it sound like he's then murdering people in his basement. Right. That's a very dark turn on history.
Yeah.
So he takes up the hobby of taxidermy. He actually donated quite a large number of his taxidermied animals, which were well done, to both the American Museum of Natural History and then later the Smithsonian. This is something that really shows his first kind of foray into his work with the natural world. He was a city alderman in New York City in 1883. While he was there, he took a train to North Dakota to hunt buffalo. Eventually, this trip became very transformative for him because he loved the land out there so much. He purchased a ranch in the Dakota Badlands, and he would return regularly to ride and hunt. He actually wrote a book about his experiences there. It was literally panned by the publisher of Forest and Stream, whose name was George Bird Grinnell. Roosevelt was very offended by this, so he apparently burst into his office to have it out with him. And after this meeting, the two were lifelong friends. They established together the Boone and Cricket Club, which was a hunters club and a group of prominent Easterners, and Roosevelt actually served as its first president.
Teddy Roosevelt was a Scorpio, so it makes sense that he takes something that
very personally. Yeah.
All
water.
Scorpios do that.
Yeah.
I guess say that generally speaking. Maybe not. Maybe not. Every Scorpio I know takes everything deeply personally.
Backtrack that a little bit.
Yeah. Teddy Roosevelt often spoke of his love of nature and the outdoors and conservancy. Here is one quote. "We have become great because of the lavish use of our resources, but the time has come to inquire seriously what will happen when our forests are gone, when the coal, the iron, the oil, and the gas are exhausted, when the soils have still further impoverished and washed into the streams, polluting the rivers, denuding the fields, and obstructing navigation."
Wow. Talk about some potent history.
Yeah, seriously.
Coming back to bite us all.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Okay, so Teddy Roosevelt became president because William McKinley was assassinated, right?
Who was that assassin? I feel like you know.
Oh, because I was in that production once upon a time. Oh my God, I don't remember his name.
Sorry,
no.
I threw you under the bus there. I just thought you might have remembered.
Hold on.
Okay.
Yes, it was Leon Czolgosz.
Okay.
Yes, and he has the gun song.
Okay.
Yeah, that's this like
in Assassins the musical.
Tight 4-part harmony song that we had to learn twice because the first time we were taught it was in one key, and then all of us just memorized exactly that, and then they
Change the
And
key.
it was like, oh, psych, it's like a half step down. And we were like, great, start from the top.
Key a G.
Key change, key a G, right. So anyway, so he became president and he's headed off on this like national speaking tour as president. And he decided to interrupt his speaking tour to go camping.
Well,
Like,
don't we all wish we could do that
I
at work?
know. He spent 2
I
weeks.
interrupted my school week to go camping.
Just go camping, right? So he spent 2 weeks camping in Yellowstone, and then he visited Grand Canyon, and then John Muir invited him to camp with him in Yosemite, and he did, and that's when the two of them became like super close friends.
Yeah, tight-knit buds.
Right, exactly. And John Muir was the one who was like, you really need to make this. We need to make this a national park.
Right.
Like,
and we need to...
all of Yosemite Valley.
Also, we need to like just make conservation like a top
thing,
priority.
A top priority.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt is quoted saying of Yosemite, it was like lying in a great solemn cathedral, far vaster and more beautiful than any built by the hand of man.
And I would agree with
Oh,
that. Yeah.
1000%.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen it. There is a great junk history on Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir.
Oh, no,
like,
but I'm going to watch now.
And then like camping in the woods. And of course it's hilarious.
I
'cause it's
feel
drunk
like
history.
a little kindred spirits with them.
People do call me a rough rider. So I get it.
They are friends brought together by nature. Not that we don't know anything about that.
No, nothing. Not
nothing
a
at all.
thing.
Nothing at all.
Yeah, not at all. So Teddy Roosevelt, while laying the cornerstone for the gateway to Yellowstone National Park in April of 1903, said the following: "The Yellowstone Park is something absolutely unique to the world, so far as I know. The scheme of its preservation is noteworthy in its essential democracy. This park was created and is now administered for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. The only way that the people as a whole can secure themselves and their children to the enjoyment and perpetuity of what the Yellowstone Park has to give is by assuming the ownership in name of the nation and by jealously safeguarding and preserving the scenery, the forests, and the wild creatures."
I would also like to just highlight the phrase, "and the wild creatures."
Yeah.
Safeguarding and preserving the wild creatures, which, how do we do that? We leave them alone.
We don't touch them.
We don't touch
We
them.
don't feed them.
We don't feed them.
We
We
leave
don't
them
give
alone.
them food. We give them. We leave them alone.
I mean, that is, I feel like that quote not only underscores what it is to be a conservationist for the parks, but it's kind of like the ideal American vision.
Also,
like by the people.
I
the
feel
idea
like,
of for the people, by the people.
Yeah.
You know, like that is very interesting there too.
The other thing is, I see
I mean, he's a politician.
a direct connection from the National Park Service mission statement to this quote right here. Because I do
You're
feel
right.
like, and also like the various components that essentially then make up what becomes a national park.
Right.
It has to serve all these following purposes. You could point to that quote and say like, that's could be where people
They
started.
draw their mission statement from there, or drew their mission statement from there. Yeah. There was always a lot of pushback when it came to the preservation of natural land. You know, as we mentioned earlier, there were people that were out to, you know, make a profit off of the land, to hunt, to develop, to do things. These are things, again, they're like history coming back to remind us, looking over this. You know, he really was trying to, when it came to the Grand Canyon, trying to push back against people who sought to utilize that space for personal gain. When Congress fought his efforts to create the national park, he used
the Grand Canyon.
At the Grand Canyon, he utilized his executive power to do so, and protect it as a national monument. So it wasn't a national park to begin with. It began as a national monument. And unfortunately, on the reflex now, we're seeing those, you know, spaces which we've been charged with, every one of us, preserving and protecting, whether you're a worker of the national park site or whether you're an average, you know, everyday citizen. We've been seeing, you know, the current administration slowly chipping away at those protections that these national monuments and national landscapes have had set up for them so that they can be preserved for the current generation and for future generations.
He said something regarding the Grand Canyon that I do feel like we can all learn from today. Quote, "In the Grand Canyon, Arizona has a natural wonder which is in kind absolutely unparalleled throughout the rest of the world. I want to ask you to keep this great wonder of nature as it is now. I hope you will not have a building of any kind, not a summer cottage, a hotel, or anything else to mar the wonderful grandeur, the sublimity, the great loneliness and beauty of the canyon. Leave it as it is. You cannot improve upon it. The ages have been at work on it, and man can only mar it. I would also like to add to not put highway robbery McDonald's right there, but too little too late.
Right. But I do feel like that is, again, let's take from history, take these lessons that we should all just have held to heart. Because isn't there, I'm not sure if it's Grand Canyon, but I think it's Arches and Canyonlands where they're really worried about how much the land around those national parks is being developed, because it will affect how, it will affect wildlife, it will affect the, noise levels, it will affect all these different things. So, there's a reason when you go to a national park, while for the most part, those national parks are in isolation or not really near things. There are exceptions, obviously, like you've got Acadia and Bar Harbor is literally right there, or Shenandoah, all the small communities that dot around that. But when you think about national parks being set up, really most of them are set up in the West in this, very untamed wilderness for the most part. So the fact that for decades, these parks were able to be left in isolation or left with a large surround, while part of the reason a park becomes a park is having that natural barrier. We've talked about that before on the show, where there needs to be some sort of natural barrier to the park, whether it's a forest or some sort of waterway, something that kind of keeps it protected. So it's, listening to Teddy Roosevelt say this, or reading over this quote, is really interesting just to see, again, how the park system has really kind of taken a lot of his ideas and ideals that he laid down and worked with them to basically craft their idea of what a park should be and how national parks should be set up. Along with being a champion for our natural landscapes, Teddy Roosevelt was very much so a bird conservationist. In the late 1800s, women's fashion dictated that hats would be decorated by bird feathers. To meet that need, poachers hunted many species of exotic birds to the brink of extinction. To address this crisis, President Roosevelt set aside Pelican Island in Florida as a federal bird reserve, or federal bird reservation, in 1903. And more protected areas followed that, and the National Wildlife Refuge System was then born because of that.
Here are the 5 national park areas that Teddy Roosevelt established while he was in office. One is Crater Lake National Park in Oregon, Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota, Sully's Hill, which is in North Dakota, but now it is managed by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, Platte National Park of Oklahoma, which is now part of Chickasaw National Recreation Area, has been sort of, went on a different journey there. Mesa Verde National Park of Colorado, and he added land to Yosemite National Park in California.
He did more than his fair share of heavy lifting for the National Park Service and for conservation in general.
Absolutely.
Teddy Roosevelt, you could argue, was probably one of the biggest environmentalists of his day. Aside from thinking about how to best conserve the land, he was really concerned with pollution and how the land itself was treated, how we as people used that land, and whether that use was for the benefit of all. So here's a quote that really speaks to that. "It is also vandalism wantonly to destroy or permit the destruction of what is beautiful in nature, whether it be a cliff, a forest, or species of mammal or bird. Here in the United States, we turn our rivers and streams into sewers and dumping grounds. We pollute the air, we destroy forests, and exterminate fishes, birds, and mammals, not to speak of vulgarizing charming landscapes with hideous advertisement. But at last, it looks as if our people were awakening." We see this all the time, not just as a people, as a society, but in the parks. We are seeing, we see vandalism so many times when it comes to carving a name into a tree or adding graffiti to a rock face. The public lands are there for the public to enjoy. If we don't treat those landscapes correctly, and if we allow this destruction, pollution and things like that to continue, then these will not be spaces for future generations to enjoy.
We can't talk about Teddy Roosevelt without talking about the invention of the teddy bear. There's a little bit of Mandela effect thinking that the bear was actually in Yellowstone National Park, because I think he's so associated with camping there, but it was actually in Louisiana.
Okay.
So he was on a hunting trip in Louisiana, and the people who were hunting with him found this black bear, and they tied the bear to a tree, and they were like, here, you have a bear that you can shoot. And Teddy Roosevelt was like, no, that isn't fair. I'm not going to do that to that bear. Because I didn't find that bear, right?
Yeah.
So he didn't shoot the bear, which then this political cartoonist, Clifford Berryman, heard about the story, and he drew a cartoon celebrating the president's decision to not kill this bear.
To be sportsman about it.
Right, exactly. So then there was this Brooklyn candy shop owner named Morris Mitchum who saw the cartoon and decided to create a stuffed toy bear and named it after the president.
Teddy Bear.
But he called it Teddy's Bear.
Oh, Teddy's Bear.
Teddy's Bear. Like, this is the bear that Teddy Roosevelt didn't
Got
shoot.
it.
And so
eventually the S was dropped.
The S was dropped.
And now, ladies
Just
and
like
gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Teddy Bear.
Right. Just like, the original name for butterfly was Flutterby, but then we just ended up
transposed
flipping that.
it. Yeah.
You know how it goes.
Flutterby. Yeah.
Right. Since Teddy Roosevelt helped to turn the volume up and really hit like the acceleration pedal on conservancy in United States history, he is memorialized in many ways throughout the National Park Service.
Right. Which seems only fitting considering how much work he did to really get conservation going in the creation of the park system. So here are the 6 different units that are sites that are dedicated or in some way memorializing Teddy Roosevelt. Now you have the Sagamore Hill National Historic Site in Oyster Bay, New York, the Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural National Historic Site in Buffalo, New York, Theodore Roosevelt National Park, which is in North Dakota, and Theodore Roosevelt Island in Washington, D.C. All of those trace his career and memorialize his contributions to America. Additionally, Teddy Roosevelt is one of the presidents which grace the face of Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. And the National Park Service is honored to administer those park sites and many others Roosevelt made possible during his storied career as a conservationist.
All of the information that we're bringing you today about Teddy Roosevelt has come from the Public Broadcasting System at pbs.org, the National Park Service at nps.gov, and also the Department of Interior at doi.gov.
Or DOI.
Or DOI.
DOI.gov.
Right. I think let's leave you with this quote before we end this trail mix with a game from Teddy Roosevelt. We have fallen heirs to the most glorious heritage a people ever received, and each one of us must do his part if we wish to show that the nation is worthy of its good fortune. All right, let's end this trail mix with a game. Are you ready, Mike?
I'm ready.
Today's game is, did Teddy Roosevelt say that, or did another president say that?
Okay, so it's a quote
So
game.
I'm going to give you a quote, and you have to identify, did Teddy Roosevelt say this?
Right.
Or did another president say it? And bonus points if you can name that president.
So who said it? Teddy Roosevelt edition.
Right.
Great.
Are you ready?
Quotes game. Yeah, let's do this.
The little owls call to each other with tremulous, quavering voices throughout the livelong night as they sit in the creaking trees.
It's Teddy Roosevelt.
That is Teddy Roosevelt. Well done.
Also, what poetic language.
I know.
Nobody talks like that anymore.
Are you ready for the next one?
Let's do it.
Water is a commodity, not by any means to be found everywhere. When found, it is more likely to be bad, being either from a bitter alkaline pool or from a hole in a creek, so muddy that it can only be called liquid by courtesy.
Another president.
Incorrect. That was Teddy Roosevelt.
Again.
Ready for the next one?
Yeah.
There are no words that can tell the hidden spirit of the wilderness, that can reveal its mystery, its melancholy, and its charm.
Another president.
No, that was Teddy Roosevelt.
This is a game where we say it's Teddy Roosevelt or another president, but all of them are Teddy Roosevelt.
No, that's not true. That's not true. Are you ready for the next one?
Yeah, I'm ready.
A nation that destroys its soils destroys itself. Forests are the lungs of our land, purifying the air and giving fresh strength to our people.
It's somebody else.
It is somebody else.
Okay,
Good job.
you looked at me. And I am going to guess that president was Calvin Coolidge.
Great guess.
Coolidge.
Incorrect. It was Franklin Roosevelt.
Okay, there we go.
Are you ready for
Cousin
the next one?
Teddy.
Okay. The old rules may say we can't protect our environment and promote economic growth at the same time. But in America, we've always used new technologies. We've used science, we've used research, and the development and discovery to make the old rules obsolete.
Another president.
That is correct, it was. Do you know which one?
Bill Clinton.
Close. It was Barack Obama.
Oh, I was going to say Barack.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. You looked at me with like Sade eyes. I don't know what that means, but...
I do not believe that there ever was any life more attractive to a vigorous young fellow than life on a cattle ranch in those days. It was a fine, healthy life, too. It taught a man self-reliance, hardihood, and the value of instant decision. I enjoyed the life to the full.
Who is Teddy Roosevelt?
That is correct.
There
it was Teddy Roosevelt. Are you ready for the next one?
I am as ready as I can be.
The extermination of the buffalo has been a veritable tragedy of the animal world.
Who is Teddy Roosevelt?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Well done.
I feel like you should give me options, like an A, B, or C.
Well, that's not how this game is being played.
I know it's not.
Are you ready?
I am.
If we've learned any lessons during the past few decades, perhaps the most important is that preservation of our environment is not a partisan challenge, it's common sense. Our physical health, our social happiness, and our economic well-being will be sustained only by all of us working in partnership as thoughtful, effective stewards of our natural resources.
Another president.
That is correct. Do you know which one?
John F. Kennedy.
Ronald Reagan.
Oh, okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
We must not only protect the countryside and save it from destruction, we must restore what has been destroyed and salvage the beauty and charm of our cities. Once our natural splendor is destroyed, it can never be recaptured. And once man can no longer walk with beauty or wonder at nature, his spirit will wither and his sustenance be wasted.
Wow. I'm going to say Teddy Roosevelt.
It sounds like he would be saying that,
but
right?
But it's not.
Because Teddy Roosevelt is just full of poetry.
Right.
That was Lyndon Johnson.
Oh, LBJ.
Okay, finally, last one.
Great. What a journey we've been on.
I know.
Yeah.
Rattlesnakes are only too plentiful everywhere, along the river bottoms, in the broken hilly ground, and on the prairies, and the great desert wastes alike. If it can, it will get out of the way and only coils up in its attitude of defense when it believes that it is actually menaced.
Teddy Roosevelt?
That is correct.
Like, who else
We're
is
gonna
talking
do
about
one
rattlesnakes?
We're going to do one more.
Great.
One bleak March day, a flock of snow buntings came. Every few moments, one of them would mount into the air, hovering about with quivering wings and warbling a loud, merry song with some very sweet notes. They were a most welcome little group of guests, and we were sorry when, after loitering around a day or two, they disappeared toward their breeding haunts.
Who is Teddy Roosevelt?
That is right.
Yeah.
Of course.
Great. Towards their breathing haunts.
This has been Trail Mix by Gaze at the National Parks, the podcast. And we're here to remind you to hike early and hike often, and that adventure is always out there.
Gaze at the National Parks was created and is hosted by Dustin Ballard and Michael Ryan.
To see images from this episode, follow our Instagram at Gaze at the National Parks. To contact us, email us at gazeatthenationalparks@gmail.com. And to find out more about the national parks spoken about on this show, visit our website, gazeatthenationalparks.com. That's Gaze, G-A-Z-E.
All original artwork featured on our website and on Instagram is by Michael Ryan.
All original music is written by Dave Seaman and performed by Dave Seaman, Mariella Klinger, and Sean Sklios. Our music producer is Skylar Fortgang.
This episode was edited by Dustin Ballard.